They chose a child filled with pain and rage, a child who had never known fear. They broke him over decades of conditioning into a living weapon, 19 gene seed organs carved into a body not yet fully grown, a secondary heart, a fused ribcage, acid-producing glands, a membrane that lets him absorb the memories of the dead by consuming their flesh. Most aspirants didn't survive the process. Those who did emerged as something more than human and something less. 8 feet tall, clad in ceramite, carrying the genetic legacy of a Primarch, sworn to an emperor entombed on a golden throne for 10,000 years. That is the cost of a single space marine. And when that weapon walked through hellfire untouched on Forge World Graia, his own brother called the Inquisition. Leandros, Battle-Brother of the Ultramarines Second Company, skipped the Chaplain, skipped the Librarians, skipped the Chapter Master, and ran straight to the one external authority with the power to destroy a Space Marine captain without accountability. By the very Codex Astartes he wielded as his weapon, Leandros is the heretic, not Titus. And the proof lives in the pages Leandros claimed to worship. But first, the concession. Because this prosecution means nothing if it's built on dishonest ground. Leandros was right to be suspicious. 100% correct in the cold calculus of the 41st Millennium to identify Captain Titus's warp resistance as a phenomenon requiring investigation. The Horus Heresy began with trusted heroes, Primarchs, the Emperor's own sons, falling to chaos. Horus WAAAGH, the most beloved of the Emperor's children, turned traitor and nearly killed the master of mankind. If a Primarch can fall, a captain can fall. Titus handled a chaos artifact of immense psychic potency on Graia and walked away unscathed when contact with it should have killed or corrupted him instantly. Entire worlds have been subjected to exterminatus for less credible evidence of corruption. Leandros' instinct to raise the alarm was, arguably, his duty. That concession is granted without hedging. The question was never whether he should have been suspicious. The question is what he did with that suspicion. And what he did damns him by his own holy book. Forge World Graia was already a nightmare before the real threat revealed itself. A planet-sized factory complex dedicated to producing war materiel for the Imperium. Titan-class war machines rolled off its assembly lines, now drowning under an Ork WAAAGH of staggering scale. Captain Titus dropped into that furnace commanding a kill team from the Second Company. Himself, veteran Sergeant Sidonus, and Battle-Brother Leandros. 3 Ultramarines operating far ahead of any major relief force, buying time in corridors that could be harboring 1,000 greenskins behind every blast door. Titus held the rank of Captain of the Second Company, one of the most prestigious positions in all of the Adeptus Astartes. He'd been vetted, tested, and proven across decades, if not centuries of service, judged worthy by chaplains, by librarians, by the chapter master himself. His loyalty had been answered in blood across 100 battlefields before Leandros ever set foot on Graia. Leandros, by contrast, occupied the most junior rank a full Astartes can hold, a battle-brother, functionally a private under the command of a captain whose service predated his very existence. From the opening hours of the Graia campaign, Leandros quoted the Codex Astartes at every opportunity. Titus adapts his tactics to the terrain. Leandros recites doctrine. Titus improvises under fire. Leandros cites chapter and verse. Sidonus, older and more battle-scarred, served as the voice of moderation between them, the experienced hand who understood that war is chaos and the Codex is a lamp rather than a cage. 3 Ultramarines, a pragmatic captain, a seasoned veteran, and a fundamentalist youth who mistook rigidity for righteousness. Beneath the Ork siege, a far worse threat had been festering. Chaos forces had manipulated events on Graia, using the greenskin invasion as cover for their real objective, a warp device capable of tearing open a portal to the Imperium. Inquisitor Drogan, an agent of the Imperial Inquisition stationed on Graia, had studied the artifact. Drogan was dead. A demon of Tzeentch, the chaos god of manipulation and sorcery, had hollowed out his corpse and was wearing the Inquisitor's skin like a puppet, manipulating Imperial forces into activating the device. Hold that fact. The institution Leandros would trust above his own chapter was already a demon's glove on the very world where he stood. Titus uncovered the deception, confronted the chaos threat, and was exposed directly to the warp artifact in the process. Raw psychic malevolence washed over him. It should have killed him. It didn't. It should have corrupted him. It couldn't. He walked through warp energy and emerged intact, without explanation, without precedent. Sidonus was murdered by the Chaos Lord Nemeroth during the fighting, a death Titus carried with visible anguish. And when it was over, when the chaos threat was destroyed and the Forge World saved, Leandros delivered his verdict. He'd already contacted the Inquisition. An Inquisitor descended on the aftermath of victory, and Titus was taken into custody. No charge processed through any legitimate channel. No chaplain consulted. No librarian summoned. A battle-brother went directly to an external authority, and a captain of the Ultramarines disappeared into 200 years of inquisitorial captivity. 2 centuries. Even for an immortal warrior, that span staggers. 200 years of interrogation, psychic probing, and methods that the Inquisition does not describe in polite company, because its techniques for determining loyalty are indistinguishable from its techniques for inflicting punishment. Titus went willingly. He looked at Leandros and told him the Codex Astartes is a guide, meant to offer wisdom rather than forge chains. Then he surrendered, dignity intact, duty fulfilled. Gone. Now. The charges. Charge 1. Chain of Command Violation. The Codex Astartes, Leandros' own sacred text, the document he cited above his captain's direct authority, establishes a specific hierarchy for reporting suspected corruption within a chapter. The chaplain is the first point of contact. This isn't a suggestion buried in an appendix. Chaplains exist for exactly this function. They are warrior priests whose codex-mandated duty is monitoring the spiritual health of their battle brothers, detecting signs of corruption, weakness, or heresy, and determining whether intervention is necessary. The Ultramarines have Chaplain Cassius, one of the most legendary spiritual authorities in the entire Adeptus Astartes. Cassius was accessible. His role existed precisely for the scenario Leandros faced. The Codex mandated him as the first checkpoint. Leandros walked past it. After the chaplain come the Librarians. Space Marine Librarians are sanctioned psychers trained to conduct psychic assessments of their fellow Astartes, scanning for warp taint, detecting chaos corruption at the molecular and spiritual level, rendering informed judgments about whether a brother has been compromised. Chief Librarian Vero Tigurius serves the Ultramarines in this capacity, widely regarded as the most powerful psyker in any Codex-compliant chapter. Tigurius could have examined Titus in minutes, scanned his mind, assessed his soul, determined with psychic certainty whether the captain's warp resistance was corruption or something else entirely. The single most definitive method available for answering the question that supposedly consumed Leandros, and he never requested it. Above the chaplain and librarians sits the chapter master, Marnius Calgar, Lord WAAAGH, supreme authority within the Ultramarines, a commander who has faced chaos across centuries of warfare and made decisions that would break lesser men. If Leandros believed his concern transcended both the chaplain's jurisdiction and the librarian's psychic capabilities, Calgar was the ultimate internal authority. Calgar would have listened, ordered the proper investigation through proper channels, and preserved both the integrity of the chapter and the rights of a captain who had just saved a Forge World. Leandros never petitioned him. Calgar's name never crossed his lips. Every internal safeguard, chaplain, librarian, chapter master, abandoned in a single leap to the Inquisition. And the implications of that leap extend beyond protocol. When a battle brother invites the Inquisition to investigate his own captain, the implicit message to the wider Imperium is that his chapter's internal safeguards have failed. that the chaplains can't be trusted, that the librarians are insufficient, that the chapter master's authority is inadequate. Leandros didn't just accuse Titus. He indicted the entire Ultramarines chapter as an institution. The months of shame, the notorious conflict between the Space Wolves and the Inquisition following the First War for Armageddon, demonstrate what happens when the Inquisition asserts jurisdiction over a chapter's internal affairs against the chapter's will. Blood, shattered trust, the Imperium's defenders tearing at each other while the true enemy laughs in the warp. Charge 2. Canonical hypocrisy. Leandros cited the Codex Astartes as his authority to question Titus. He quoted it on the battlefield. He invoked it as justification. And then he violated the Codex's own explicit reporting protocols with a transgression more severe than anything Titus had done. Titus adapted his tactics under fire, a practice Rabute Guilliman himself embodied throughout his campaigns. Guilliman wrote the Codex in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy as guidance, a framework for adaptation, the accumulated wisdom of the greatest military mind humanity had produced. He never intended it as an infallible holy text. Guilliman was a pragmatist who changed his approach as circumstances demanded. When he returned to the Imperium in the 41st Millennium, he was horrified by how rigidly his words had been twisted into the very kind of inflexible dogma he'd written them to prevent. Calger's own leadership of the Ultramarines reflects this. Flexible interpretation of the Codex is wisdom, not weakness. Leandros memorized the passages and ignored the purpose. He worshipped the letter while violating the spirit. That's fundamentalism. And in the Warhammer 40K universe, fundamentalism that perverts sacred texts into instruments of paranoia and betrayal produces exactly the outcome chaos would desire. Charge 3. Leandros trusted the Inquisition, and the Inquisitor on Graia was already a demon's puppet. Inquisitor Drogan, dead and hollowed out by a servant of Tzeentch, had been operating on the very world where Leandros stood, while Leandros reported to the very institution Drogan represented. The man who accused Titus of chaos corruption ran directly into the arms of an organization that chaos had already infiltrated within arm's reach. This isn't hypothetical corruption in some distant sector. Drogan was on Graia. The evidence was still warm. Leandros bypassed his own loyal chapter, whose chaplains, librarians, and chapter masters stood ready, loyal, and proven, to hand his captain to an institution that had just demonstrated on this battlefield that it could be worn like a suit by the ruinous powers themselves. The final charge isn't procedural. It isn't canonical. It's theological. Titus's warp resistance has no established explanation within standard Astartes biology. Normal Space Marines don't simply shrug off contact with artifacts of that magnitude. Something protected him. Something that defied every model of how warp energy interacts with post-human physiology. One theory has gained enormous traction among those who study this case, and Space Marine 2's events. Titus's eventual vindication after 200 years, his restoration to the Ultramarines, his continued demonstrated loyalty, only strengthen it. The Emperor's Gift. The Emperor of mankind, even from his entombment on the Golden Throne, has demonstrated throughout 10,000 years of lore the ability to extend his psychic protection to favored individuals. The Sisters of Battle manifest acts of faith, moments of impossible divine intervention attributed directly to the Emperor's will. Living saints walk the battlefields of the 41st millennium wreathed in golden light, immune to the corruption that devours lesser souls. And the Grey Knights, the most elite Space Marines in existence, the secret 666th founding, created from the Emperor's own genetic material, possess total immunity to chaos corruption. Every Grey Knight has faced demons and warp energy repeatedly. Not one has ever fallen. They are walking proof that warp resistance isn't heresy. It's the highest possible expression of loyalty and purity. If warp resistance were inherently suspicious, the entire Grey Knights chapter would be heretics, and the Imperium would have exterminated itself millennia ago. Titus's resistance fits this pattern. A captain of such proven loyalty, such demonstrated devotion, shielded by the Emperor's own psychic grace, carrying a gift he may not even understand. A blessing that manifests as the inability to be touched by the warp's corruption. Space Marine 2 clears him. 200 years of the Inquisition's worst, and they found nothing, because there was nothing to find. He returns to the Ultramarines, demoted to lieutenant, the scar of Leandros' accusation still visible in his reduced rank, but loyal, proven, vindicated by the very institution that held him. And this is where the full weight of what Leandros did becomes clear. If Titus's warp resistance is the Emperor's gift, divine favor granted by the Master of Mankind to one of his most faithful servants, then Leandros didn't just break the chain of command, didn't just violate his own codex, didn't just hand his captain to an institution already wearing a demon's leash. He looked at the Emperor's chosen instrument and called it corruption. He stared at divine grace and named it heresy. By the Codex Astartes, by Guilliman's intent, by the Chaplain's authority he ignored, by the Librarian's judgment he never sought, by the chapter master's wisdom he bypassed, by every single standard Leandros claimed to uphold. There is only one word for a man who accuses the Emperor's blessing of being the enemy's taint: blasphemer. The prosecution rests. The evidence speaks for itself. Titus endured 2 centuries in chains and emerged clean. Leandros held the codex in his hands and broke every rule written in it. One of them is a heretic by the standards of their own chapter, their own Primarch, and their own Emperor. 13 years the community has known which one. Now you have the receipts. Subscribe for more stories like this.